Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ryan Berg, and I'm a senior fellow with the Americas Program at CSIS. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation on ensuring a more competitive North America. Before we begin, let's take care of logistics. This event will last approximately 60 minutes. Following the panelists' remarks and a moderated discussion, we will field questions from the audience. We ask our audience to please submit questions by clicking on the Ask Live Questions button on the event webpage. Please note that this is a live stream discussion, will be recorded and made available on the event webpage within 48 hours of the event. Again, good afternoon. COVID-19 has catalyzed a digital transformation in North America and around the world. At the same time, it has exacerbated technological inequalities within communities and between countries. This digital divide has elevated concerns, especially for investors, over the rollout and regulation of new information and communications technology, ICT, in North America, and has highlighted a need to strengthen supply chains across the hemisphere. All people, especially those in underserved and inaccessible communities, will need access to cutting-edge, modern technology in order to stay competitive in the coming digital age. To achieve this, North American governments must establish clear rules of the game and cooperate to ensure that no regions or communities are left behind. Creating a comprehensive digital strategy for North America will require major private investment, public sector engagement, and high-level dialogue. Further, this effort should make use of pre-existing cooperation mechanisms, such as the United States Mexico-Canada Agreement, which provides a template for economic and regulatory cooperation for this new digital strategy to expand upon. Closing the digital divide in North America is both important and timely. Another result of the COVID-19 pandemic has been a shift in supply chains and investment away from China. This presents a major opportunity for the North American digital technology and ICT sectors. By pursuing an ambitious strategy of digital cooperation, the governments of North America can create a more attractive environment for foreign investors. This will enable the private sector to make investments that will improve the access to underserved regions and communities that they have to access technologies across the continent, and ensure that the countries of North America remain competitive in the coming digital age. I would like to take a moment to introduce our moderator for today's event, Ms. Meredith Broadbent, Senior Advisor with the CSIS Scholl Chair in International Business. Ms. Broadbent has nearly 30 years of experience as a public policy professional and expert on international trade and economics. She previously chaired the U.S. International Trade Commission and was Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Industry, Market Access, and Telecommunications. Ms. Broadbent has played a part in a number of agreements such as NAFTA and the Doha round of WTO negotiations throughout her long career in international trade. And we are so pleased that she has joined us today to moderate today's event. Ms. Broadbent, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. We have a terrific panel today, and that was a good introduction. I think what I'll do is just run through our panelists and their bios so we have a picture of who's going to be speaking, and then turn to them. Our first speaker today is Trevor Kennedy, Director of Trade and International Policy at the Business Council of Canada. As Director of Trade and International Policy, Mr. Kennedy oversees the Council's work on trade policy initiatives and foreign investment, and he works closely with private and public sector partners throughout North America, Europe, and the Indo-Pacific. Our second panelist is Mr. Robert Blair, Senior Director of 5G and External Affairs at Microsoft. Mr. Blair has nearly 20 years of experience working in government prior to Microsoft, including as Associate Director for National Security Programs at OMB and a Special Representative for Telecommunications Policy at the White House. He is an expert on ICT, 5G, and national security. And our third panelist is Mr. Ernesto Flores, a member of the Advisory Council at IFT in Mexico, the Institute for Federal Communications. Mr. Flores has worked in telecommunication policy and consulting for over 3 decades and has been on the IFT Advisory Council for 10 years. He has worked closely with the governments of Mexico, Peru, and Brazil on their ICT policies and regulations, and is widely published on the subject of telecom policy. So with that, I will start with Mr. Kennedy for his opening presentation. And I thank these 3 distinguished panelists for joining us today. Mr. Kennedy.
All right, well, thank you. And thanks also to CSIS and the Americas Program for hosting this important discussion on ensuring competitiveness in North America and the role that USMCA can play in enhancing the regional economy. So maybe a bit of context first, just for Canada. So we're a trading nation, and our emergence as an advanced economy and widespread prosperity and well-funded social programs are closely tied to the rise of international trade. And fortunately, Canadians are well aware of that connection. And today, 65% of our GDP is tied to trade, much of it linked directly to North America. So it's really difficult to overstate the importance of North America and North American trade for Canada. And because of NAFTA, so USMCA's predecessor, the Canadian economy, particularly natural resources, food and manufacturing sectors, they become deeply integrated with our partners in North America. And so as the digital economy and digital trade grow in importance, especially in light of COVID-19 and the rapid digital adoption, we really need to consider what role USMCA can play and what our policymakers can do to ensure that this part of the economy is also well integrated and competitive with the rest of the world. So at a high level, to ensure the agreement and its corresponding digital components are a success, we have some work to do. So since the agreement entered into force last year, the Business Council of Canada and its partners in the U.S. and Mexico have been working together to promote a joint North American agenda, which is very much centered on USMCA and its full potential. So our work on USMCA is divided into 3 buckets, and I'll briefly discuss our 3 priorities. So first, right off the bat, we think that sustaining support for the agreement is absolutely critical. As you know, USMCA, or CUSMA as we call it here in Canada, enjoys broad bipartisan support in the United States, and it remains popular with the business community and policy leaders in Canada, and I believe in Mexico as well. And uniquely, supporters of this agreement include labor, farmers, and other important constituencies elsewhere throughout the economy. This is rare for a trade agreement, and it's especially noteworthy given how unpopular NAFTA was towards the end of the agreement. We all know NAFTA was important, especially in the business community, but we know that we can't end up in a similar position again, being on the defensive. So we think it's very important to keep up promoting the agreement, to communicate its benefits, including in digital trade. And that's something I think all of us across North America need to do to ensure that USMCA ensures its broad support. Our second priority is ensuring full implementation and enforcement. The agreement provides a strong foundation for North American growth, especially with its advanced digital trade chapter. But the agreement can't meet its full potential unless it's implemented as negotiated. And enforcement, when necessary, needs to proceed quickly and efficiently. So we'll continue to monitor the agreement's progress, and we're proud to support an initiative led by the Brookings Institution in the development of a USMCA tracker. So this tracker, when it's launched, should be early next year, will provide the business communities across North America with a credible third-party audit of the agreement's performance, and also give us somewhere we can measure how well it performs in digital trade and with the digital economy. And our third and I guess final priority is ensuring regional competitiveness or enhancing regional competitiveness. So USMCA provides a great foundation for growth. It's unique among trade agreements, especially that it includes a chapter on competitiveness. And you know, this chapter creates a competitiveness committee with a broad mandate to promote government initiatives to enhance our collective economic situation. This committee's work is at a very early stage, and we believe that the business community is in actually a good position to influence its work, as are other stakeholders. And with our partners, we are developing a set of targeted priorities, including priorities for digital trade. So as this work develops, we'd be happy to share this, and we think our counterparts will share this as well with the rest of the policy community, and we hope others engage with this process as well. So the world's never been more competitive, and North America needs to be ready to compete in digital trade and elsewhere with the EU, with other emerging blocs and current blocs as well. So maybe just to conclude, I'll just say the Business Council of Canada and its members look forward to continuing to work with the North American business community to promote the agreement and its benefits, and specifically for this conversation, some of the digital benefits from the agreement. And we hope that over time, our commitment to North America and work within North America will spill over to our policy leaders as well. And we believe we're stronger when we work together. So anyway, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Trevor. Do you have a sense of what some of your digital priorities will be for the USMCA, or the, whatever you call it? What do you call it? The CASUSTA?
Yeah, CUSMA. It's an unfortunate, unfortunate result of it being named USMCA. Is in, I guess the Canadian convention is we have to put Canada first in our trade agreements as well.
Yeah.
So there are some priorities. I don't want to go into too much detail just because we're still discussing. But effectively, we believe it's important that that we have some integration. We have things like privacy reform, that we're investing in our digital economies, including the digital infrastructure. There's a lot of need to collaborate on cybersecurity, and ensuring that we continue to have free flow of data. There's no data localization requirements. I guess in some cases, supporting what's in the agreement itself. But I suppose as a broader theme, we really believe that USMCA can be promoted more as a solution to policy problems. And so in Canada and the US and Mexico, I think our governments are all facing new pressures driven by COVID-19 and the economic response. And we just hope that we can promote USMCA as a potential solution to enhancing our digital supply chain or just overall our digital economy. So but very happy in the future to share some more specifics as we land on those recommendations.
Thanks, Trevor. That's great. Let's see. Our second panelist is Mr. Robert Blair. He's Senior Director of 5G and External Affairs at Microsoft. Robert.
Thanks, Meredith. And if MCA is a framework that all of our countries can work together to hopefully address some of the challenges that our economies are facing. If there's any indication of the potential for unity, I think the similarities among at least my and Trevor's comments might bode well. It's always encouraging when people don't collude ahead of time, when people pull similar themes from similar issues. So I'm going to start my conversation. It's be a very quick set of comments because I think that there will be a lot of interesting questions that will really help us get to the root of some of the issues that will help propel our economies forward. But I do want to take a few minutes before we get to questions to kind of talk about the USMCA and then some of the general issues that I see we can build upon cooperatively to build a stronger regional economy. First of all, I think it bears some looking back to where USMCA came from. It was negotiated starting in 2017. The final ratification wasn't until 2020, and Canada didn't ratify CUSMA until I think it was March of 2020. A week after that, both Canada and Mexico, Canada, Mexico, and the United States all closed our common borders to non-essential travel. While trade continued, essentially everything that we had relied upon in cross-border relations stopped at that point, and we're still not back to pre-COVID travel levels. That said, the vision that USMCA put forward, one of a common economy, one of a regional economy that could work together to solve some of our common issues, really still holds today. So our three countries really, from my perspective, have an incredible opportunity to work together to build a stronger and more resilient and prosperous North America. What's important for us today on this call, this seminar, to grasp, I think, is how many of these challenges our countries are facing separately in building our individual digital economies. How many of those are common challenges, and how many of those, solving those, require our countries to work together to optimize solutions. In some ways, this is indicative of how interconnected our economies have become, but it's I think it's also emblematic of how our economies are evolving into this highly connected digital set of ecosystems. The USMCA's provisions and its recommendations on the digital economy, they establish a very strong framework to advance the region's digital agenda. It opens the door for a more robust, secure digital economy for the region, and it fosters cooperation, importantly, and this is, I think, critical, on cybersecurity, international standards, and best practices that we can share across borders. It also, and this is a personal priority, it also recognizes the importance of ensuring equity of access to ICT, to information and communication technologies for people with disabilities, as well as ensuring that public data is made available as a resource for business opportunities. And that's not just for large companies, obviously, but incredibly importantly for Mexico, the United States, and Canada separately, as well as together for small and medium enterprises. But I think, as Trevor noted, as strong as it is, it's just a framework. And how the countries are going to work within that framework to build regional approaches to cybersecurity, trusted tech, and data flows will really determine how well we as countries achieve our economic and societal objectives. One useful benchmark, maybe, at least for the U.S.-Mexico partnership, is the recent relaunch in September of the U.S.-Mexico High-Level Economic Dialogue, or the HLED. I'm sure Canada has, no, actually, I'm sure Mexico has a slightly different acronym for that. The HLED provides a useful guide to the priorities of the U.S.-Mexico bilateral agenda, covering important topics such as cybersecurity and the need to strengthen U.S.-Mexico supply chains. Coming out of COVID, I think that both of those are going to be critical for our countries to take a common approach to. Encouragingly, the HLED's pillars note the critical importance of regulatory compatibility between our two countries. Again, critical for cross-border trade, as well as enhancing bilateral cross-border data flows and collaborating on cybersecurity. For Microsoft and for our digital economies, these are critical challenges that we must address together. There's a lot more goodness actually in the HLED's pillars, and we are all waiting to see just not what our countries are able to achieve, but what we as the private sector, as civil society, can do to help support those outcomes. We, the US and Mexico, have a great opportunity, and I'm thinking both of governments and civil societies, to move forward cooperatively to strengthen our economies, build resilience in our supply chains, and lessen the digital divide within our populations. Each of these steps must be achieved to maintain our public's trust in technology. And that challenge becomes all the greater as our economies become more reliant upon technology, become more reliant upon challenges within technology, such as AI and how AI and machine learning are applied. Governments and businesses worldwide are recognizing that as we rebuild after the pandemic, we've got to take this opportunity to ensure that the recovery is shared by all. We can rebuild our economies to be even more inclusive than they were pre-pandemic. This is an opportunity to change the way our economies relate with everybody within our societies, not just the manufacturers, not just those that are organized, but those who may be in more rural areas, those who are in traditionally under-accessed areas in urban societies. And the more government and industry is able to work together, the more we'll be able to pull those parts of society in. As many here probably know, the Mexican executive, and I expect Mr. Flores to perhaps touch on this, has recently released a new ICT policy and a new national digital strategy. These are critically important steps in providing guidance and insight into Mexico's digital future. That will help industry in the United States and in Mexico and in Canada learn about new ways we can work together to support a future that's built in Mexico, in the United States, and in Canada on strong social platforms. In Mexico, Internet for All. In the United States, there's a different name for it, and in Canada, similar initiatives, different names. That's closing the digital divide is not a challenge that's unique to Mexico. We're all wrestling with it. And I personally am incredibly proud as what we would call a rural redneck American of the work my company has been doing to bring connectivity to underserved areas around the world, including here in my backyard in rural Virginia. We're also working closely with the Mexican government, where we believe that TV white space technology can be an important tool to improve connectivity for its people. One final word on 5G and the Internet of Things, two issues that are very, very close to my heart. 5G on the cloud, which is something that I'm working on right now, brings greater security given the work that we and other companies are doing to improve the application of AI and holistic approaches to cybersecurity, to the way we communicate. And it's already enabling the build out of the Internet of Things into new use cases as we begin to recover from this pandemic. Manufacturing, transportation, medicine, even fighting climate change. The ability to connect millions of devices and analyze our data using AI, it's truly revolutionary. And I think that building a common approach among our three countries to building out these capabilities could be an exciting regional advantage, and one that I hope that our leaders and governments are considering. So with that, Meredith, thanks for the time, and I'll return it back to you.
Robert, what is the most fundamental thing Mexico needs to do to lessen the digital divide? What's the biggest policy priority there?
Well, I can't speak for the Mexican government. I think that the next speaker is probably in a much better position given his involvement and advice to the Mexican government. But from the U.S. perspective, one of the great challenges that we face is finding efficient ways to reach out to rural America and underserved areas in urban areas. The cost of laying fiber can be extremely expensive in certain areas. Here where I live in the so-called mountains of Virginia, the last 10 miles can be very difficult to lay, especially when there are very few people toward the end of those. So establishing a toolkit of connectivity is something that all governments are leaning more and more into. And that would include, of course, 5G. It include wired, the fibers we've been talking about, wireless broadband, and satellite technologies that are also maturing. So again, I will not and cannot speak for the Mexican government, but I do know that they're putting a lot of time and effort into thinking of new ways, just as we are here in the United States, of using all of those tools in the most efficient way to reach out to people who need to be connected to the internet.
Got it. Thank you very much. That's a great lead into Ernesto's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Meredith. And thanks to the CSIS Americas Program. I'll try to get into those issues right now. I prepared a text here. Let's see. I think we pretty much agree that the ICT sector in telecommunications is a pillar of modern society. In the end, the objective is to provide access at reasonable prices to the largest number of people. Good telecommunications networks are essential for progress, and it is the obligation of any state to pull as many levers as it can to promote their rollout, and that they work adequately well to meet the demands of the people and the economy. Probably the most important lever is competition. It not only brings about lower prices and better quality, but it also makes available a much deeper pool of resources to achieve the end objective. Competition in many ways, positive and negative, played a role in all telecom reforms in Mexico. Privatization in 1990, the telecom law in 1995, and the telecom reform of 2013. Worldwide, the ICT sector is vibrant, moving at a very fast speed, bringing about new technologies and new uses of technology to improve productivity and improve society's welfare. But at this point, the Mexican telecom sector seems to be stalled, with very little direction from policymakers and regulators. Of course, there was a boost in the pandemic and lockdown, with access pass and revenues growing, but these effects are waning, as can be seen from the recent quarterly reports of the players in the market and other recent events, such as, sadly, the retrenchment of Telefónica from the Mexican market and other Latin American countries, the failure of Alta, the wholesale network, which, by the way, was a failure in the making from the very beginning, as an agency problem was built into its corporate governance rules, and then the difficulty and eventual failure of at least a couple of other M&A transactions, which would have created stronger players in Mexico. But these events do not forecast the coming of better times. They anticipate all indicators moving in the wrong direction. More concentration in the market, higher prices, lower investment, lower quality, less diversity, and a much larger digital divide. Mexico is at a crossroads right now. Depending on which path it decides to take, things could get much better or much worse for the foreseeable future. Unfortunately, I really believe that government seems to be failing on its efforts to bring connectivity to everyone. Ever since the 90s, and much more during the first decade of this century, many countries started outlining plans to boost connectivity. Mexico has also moved in this direction, but it has always been late. In the last three administrations, 2006, 2012, 2018, plans to do this were published 3 or even more years after the administrations were inaugurated. This time, of course, it's no exception. The digital agenda, as was mentioned previously, was recently published, but in my view, it lacks coherence and specificity. Open software and reviving state-owned companies is not a strategy that will achieve the main objective of a digital agenda. We should be creating a roadmap to promote universal access to better services at affordable prices at a minimum cost to the public coffers. And as recently as last week, in a misunderstanding of attributions into different parts of the Mexican state, it was suggested that some of these objectives would be achieved by imposing obligations to Telmex, the incumbent player. Doing this would not only bring about legal battles that could deter growth and investment even more, but would also, if not thought out well, bring about a system of internal press subsidies which would make investment operations much more inefficient, would require regulatory protections, and would significantly hamper competition. Internal plus subsidies imposed by political and regulatory mandates are not welcome in a competitive market. The institutional framework in Mexico is definitely the best we have ever had. Yes, it can be improved, but it should not be scrapped. What do we have now? Telecom regulator, IFT, and a competition regulator, COFECE, which have mostly done a very good job. And we have a national digital strategy coordination linked to the presidency, which authored the recently published digital agenda. The underministry in charge of telecom policy has literally been effaced, and sadly so, with no noticeable effects, as it had been unable or was not allowed to articulate a public policy to promote investment growth, connectivity, and digital inclusion. I think these things are getting murkier and murkier. We have two regulators getting into fights over who the regulator of the digital market is. The Supreme Court ended up intervening, and in my view, the court's decision is myopic, as it is not prospective in any which way. It has created not only a problem for the regulation of convergent services, but has also created a large arbitrage opportunity for players, many of which are multinational companies, which are not only much harder to regulate, but also have very deep pockets. Another problem is the uncertainty of the existence of the regulators in the very short term. The government has made 3 attempts in the last year to constrain their attributions or even expunging them. So far, these efforts have come to naught, but other levers have been pulled. Budget cuts have been constant year after year, reducing the resources to meet their objectives. Commissioners have not been appointed to their boards. IFT, for example, has only 5 commissioners right now, 5 out of 7, which if no appointments are made in the next 4 months, the IFT will be only operating with 4 commissioners. Though many issues can still be solved with a board of 4, there are certain competition levers, such as imposing measures to eliminate barriers to competition, determine the existence and regulating access to essential facilities, and mandating divestitures, require, by law, a minimum of 5 votes in favor. Needless to say, it is imperative that these regulators do not become inoperative. If their structures change through a constitutional amendment, so be it, as hopefully such a change will require an ample discussion of the future of the sector in Mexico. But making the regulators walking zombies should definitely not be an option. It should be mentioned that most of the reform of 2013 was included almost as a copy-paste in the USMCA, or TMEC as we call it here in Mexico. This should make it resilient to petty attacks, but this by no means makes the current institutional framework bulletproof. In summary, my view, the ICT sector in Mexico is at a crossroads. Who in his or her right mind would invest a penny if the rules and the institutional framework are not clear? Let us hope that regulators, the executive power, and the lawmakers see the much larger picture and will pull whichever levers they can in order to promote better ICT policies that will lessen the digital divide in Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flores. That was great. Did any of the panelists want to comment on anything their compatriots on the panel said? Robert or Trevor, did you have any other comments? Okay. You know, it's interesting the role of a trade agreement and sort of opening up a market. I mean, I think what I heard you say was that USMCA or TMAC or the other name of it in Canada, CUSMA, actually has very dynamic, forward-leaning deregulatory provisions in it. And it gives tools to folks looking for more competition and more price drops for consumers, et cetera, et cetera. I remember working on the U.S. Mexico Telecom Mutual Recognition Agreement, and that had some benefits for consumers and ended up really lowering the cost of calling into Mexico for consumers back and forth. So I think there's a lot to work with here. I get a sense that you all are seeing some hesitancy within the political leadership in Mexico to really implement a lot of the forward-leaning provisions that were in USMCA. And I wondered kind of what you thought this was a result of it. Is it a sense that distrust of foreign investors, or is it pressure coming from the one large dominant supplier in Mexico? Is there any sort of explanation politically of what's going on there and why there is a concern that Mexico may not robustly start implementing and enforcing the trade agreement USMCA?
Actually, maybe if I could just jump in on that point. It's certainly we hear issues, I think, among all three of our countries. I just see very early on. I mean, you and especially with your experience with NAFTA, this there's all this effort to negotiate agreement and have it enter into force, but sometimes our policymakers' attention shifts, and I think already in Canada, United States, and I could go through specific concerns. It's probably not ideal for a setting like this, and Mexico as well. There's a growing list of issues, irritants, and I think it's really critical that our governments collectively take stock of that and note that, just because the agreement's in force now and we could celebrate that we can't take the situation for granted, and we have to make sure that whether it's on energy or on autos or on dairy in Canada, that across the board that we're doing what we need to do to make sure the agreement functions the way it was intended. And I think there is a risk right now, and there might be some relevance for Mexico as well as for the U.S. and Canada, as our countries have their own respective Build Back Better policies or other policies to respond to current crises today, that we're not undermining the agreement. It would be a real shame to throw away all this great work. And I think, as across all three of our countries, it was all hands on deck to get to where we were, and we really need to make sure that this agreement survives and meets everyone's expectations.
Good. Robert, did you have a comment?
I think Trevor much better summarized some of the dynamics among the three countries than I ever could. What I would say, though, on the digital side is that we've got a confluence of issues internationally, not just between or among U.S., Canada, and Mexico, but between the U.S. and the Europeans, between the Europeans and the Chinese, between the U.S. and Chinese. There are concerns about privacy and how cross-border data flows can be protected appropriately. And there's a dynamic between increasing cross-border data flows and protecting or restricting cross-border data flows because of concerns on privacy. Those concerns, which are leading to increased nationalism or regionalism, directly undermine some of the efficiencies that the ICT sector, a global ICT or a large regional ICT interconnected sector, can bring to our economies. So what's critical right now is that our countries continue to keep talking to each other, not just to each other as governments, but that industry is also involved. I think we've seen on cybersecurity that some of the best information and some of the best tools for fighting cybercrime and some of the egregious hacks that we've seen come from industry in cooperation with government. And as we continue to share learnings, as we continue to share experience, we'll be able to find solutions to these problems. But it's a painful process that we're only in the middle of right now. I think, as Trevor said, we need to keep talking. We have a framework. It'd be horrible to jettison that over the side. And when it comes to the U.S. and Mexico specifically, I think that the high-level economic dialogue is a sign that both governments realize that a more structured framework of discussion is critical to finding solutions to these issues.
Great, thank you. I mean, am I correct to think that Telmex in Mexico is pushing back against implementation of USMCA?
I think that is a very hard question because it requires making a judgment for which I have very little information. I think that would be not responsible. I don't think Telmex or America Móvil, because it's actually much more than just Telmex, has been doing well, reasonably well, still does. It still reported fine numbers last week. Of course, if you have some, you want more. That's for sure. But then again, I don't think they have that much power, right? What's happening in Mexico is that, and it's not only happening in the ICT or telecom sector, it's happening pretty much in every single important sector for the economy, is that the economic framework is changing. Some are much more tied to the USMCA than others, telecom being one of the ones that is more tightly tied to it. So what they end up doing is they do not impose restrictions, right? The overall framework for the three countries is there, and it is not by imposing restrictions that will violate the treaty, but by creating incentives. This is all incentives based. And in the end, people and economies and companies react to incentives. And that is what we are seeing. I don't see things changing in the short term. And what we will see is the consequences of pushing the lever of incentives, not the lever of restrictions.
Okay, good. In terms of closing the digital divide, how much is Mexico in particular going to have to rely on foreign investment? And what is the environment like for foreign investment at this point?
The environment as well, I think I talked about that topic, right? Meaning if it were my penny, I'm not sure I would spend it here or I would invest it here, right? Because I need to have the rules in order to do that. It is a very important question because it depends on how you measure it. And I don't think anyone has come up with a blueprint for the network that would be needed, right? My very gross number for this, for us to reach a pool of investment like in the US or Canada, which are not that different on a per capita basis, it's like $30 billion, right? $30 billion is a very large number, huge. There is no way that the government will ever have $30 billion to invest on a network. And that is just the network. Then you need the commercialization of that network, and then you need digital education. It's not that by having the network, you've got you close the digital divide. There's much more that needs to be done after that, right? So if you take the number, it's unreasonable to assume that the government will get to do that, right? Just building a backbone will cost like anywhere between $2 and $3 billion. If the backbone is to get not to Monterrey, Mexico City, and Guadalajara, right? I know it needs to go well beyond that. That is not there. So private investment is the only way to get the resources. And we are moving in the different direction, right? For one thing, we are scaring private investment. The other one is the government is trying to put public investment, but $50 million or $100 million is not going to dent. It's not going to make a dent on the problem. So the whole picture needs to change in order for us to close the gap, and I don't think it will happen.
Okay. This is my ignorance. It was the dispute settlement, the investor state protection mechanism in USMCA made less rigorous when USMCA was renegotiated from NAFTA. I know there were certain sectors where there was diminished rights for foreign investors based on USMCA.
I don't know the answer.
Don't know. Okay. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question in terms of if you do have a problem in Mexico, you know, what recourses are there? Can you all comment on the high level economic dialogue in terms of what the agenda has been so far and what you might suggest that they grapple with in the future? Robert, you want to take that maybe?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was going back to my notes to see what sort of detail I can provide. I think since we're not obviously involved with the government to government conversations, I guess I'd steer folks back to the fact sheet that the U.S. government put out. It lays out the different pillars of the high level economic dialogue. One that we focus a lot on is pillar 3, which is securing the tools for future prosperity. And in my comments, I remarked on the importance of regulatory compatibility, strengthening cybersecurity, and facilitating bilateral collaboration and tackling those challenges, and then enhancing bilateral cross-border flows. Those, if we can get those right between our countries, we really open up a huge, a huge common market for our countries to, our common economies to build upon. But as Mr. Flores points out, there is some lack of trust, I think, between the Mexican government and some international companies that could come in and help build out some of the ICT sector within Mexico. There are many common priorities between what I'm seeing come out of the Mexican government and frankly what my company has also been working on. And closing that digital divide is incredibly important. Here in the United States, we are putting a lot of money as a government into closing the digital divide. There's no doubt about it. The money that's being proposed as part of the reconciliation package and other pieces of legislation totals tens of billions of dollars for broadband and other issues. I think we're up to $58 to $60 billion for closing the digital divide here in the United States. And that has a very specific level of performance that it's attempting to achieve. There are many other ways to address the digital divide in cooperation, and we are working closely with governments around the world to do so. I think the high-level economic dialogue begins to speak to cloud and a cloud-first policy as a way to actually improve digital inclusion. That's something that I know that I'm hoping to see more clarity out of the Mexican government on, and the digital strategy and the ICT strategy that were recently released. There are elements of AI and cloud, which I think could be made clearer. And the more international corporations see that clarity, the more they'll have a better idea of how they can best interact with Mexico in order to help achieve closing the digital divide, building out IoT, and frankly, making our economies build more closely together.
Okay. Ernesto, any comment on the high-level economic dialogue?
Well, I understand that one of the most important issues they're dealing with right now is security, including cybersecurity, right? So it has come to the top of the agenda of at least Mexico, U.S., right? But also with Canada, and that has been at the top of all the discussions. That is my understanding. Apart from that, I don't know how they've gotten into the details of how they want to implement whatever they're thinking, right? What we see is what is being done here, the actual steps and what is being said every single day, and that sort of forecasts what's coming in the very near future, right? It is moving in the direction that I was mentioning, right? So they will stretch as much as they can the framework without any violations, I hope, right? But still, it's not bulletproof in any which way.
Meredith, I think one other thing I'd throw out there on DHL and ED is the emphasis on improving U.S. Mexico supply chains. And that's something we've alluded to once or twice here in this conversation. But I think it's one of those opportunities that's maybe once in a lifetime, where through COVID, every country has recognized the vulnerabilities and risks inherent in their key supply chains. and money is being put toward them. Companies are taking a look at where those risks might lie and how they can address them. Semiconductors is something that I've worked on not in my current job, but in previous jobs. And Mexico's got some very promising semiconductor manufacturing capabilities, which, as the US government takes a look at how to reposition its semiconductor manufacturing supply chain, I hope is an opportunity for our companies to work together. There are others, but the supply chain, addressing supply chain risks right now is one of those areas I really think that as a region, Canada, US, and Mexico, we can make some significant investment decisions and really make a difference in the next 20, 30 years of our economy.
So policy-wise, though, what are the policies that would lessen supply chain risks? I mean, I think this probably the semiconductor situation is really interesting, but that's probably its own animal in terms of the other supply chains where you've got companies thinking about relocating from Asia, coming to the U.S., lots of bottlenecks in our ports and so forth, lots of bulges everywhere. Is there a way that connectivity can enhance connectivity, can smooth out some of these challenges that we're facing?
Well, I think certainly we believe very strongly that taking a technological approach to addressing supply chain risks is an efficient and effective way to go. I've done a lot of work in my government career on taking more regulatory approaches to reducing supply chain risks, on sanctions and a variety of other tools the U.S. government has had. But as we evolve technologically, there are ways that we can help we can use technology to in a more nuanced and efficient way, eliminate supply chain risks in a way that keeps our flows of commerce going across national borders. So I'm hopeful that the HLED provides that framework for discussions on supply chain risks, and then companies and governments can work together to find new ways to eliminate or at least minimize them while still maximizing economic trade among our countries. So yes, I think that it's an important area within HLED, but I think it's just getting started from what I've been able to pick up from the outside. I think this window will close over the next 4 or 5 years as money begins to move. This is the time to begin to shape the policies to make sure it moves in the right way.
Right. Trevor, how is Canada and the Canadian business community looking at the supply chain risk issue at this point, and whether ICT can help?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm actually going to just speak a little bit about what the other panelists were discussing, but also I'll just say is that we're looking at Canadian business leaders and what issues are top of mind. We know actually supply chain risk right now is number one, so that's a real concern and one that will probably last into the months ahead. But part of the challenge here is that based on USMCA and now the new administration, we've had great dialogue, I think, between Canada and the US. In fact, we don't have the high level economic dialogue, but we have something else called the Canada-US roadmap. And so within that roadmap, which they released a month or so into the new administration, there's a lot of discussion about working together on supply chain security, a lot of discussion around cybersecurity. So there's that great level of collaboration there. We have some more at a deputy minister level, some dialogue with Mexico, more at the government level, not so much with business. But there really doesn't seem to be that North American conversation, unfortunately. And one thing we did see that in the roadmap between Canada and the US, it may have also been in the initial readout between the presidents, but a discussion about bringing back the North American Leaders Forum, or the Three Amigos. So that it's been a very long time since they've met. There hasn't really been any North American level discussion, certainly not at our leaders level, and maybe a framework looking forward to. We can look at how right now the EU and the US are working together with their Trade and Technology Council more across at the ministerial level. So there maybe needs to be more dialogue at that North American lens, and not just bilateral with Canada, bilateral with Mexico, Canada, Mexico. Otherwise, there's a bit of a risk that there's overlap and lack of consistency in policy. And I'll just go back to one other thing that I mentioned in my opening remarks. So USMCA includes this competitiveness committee, which is really unique, and so far hasn't had a chance to do a whole lot yet. But I know it certainly it could do a lot, and really the focus is what what can they do within the North American context. And I think supply chains are one area where collectively the business community, academics, others can really push our governments to look at it more within the trade policy lens. What can USTR do in Canada with Global Affairs Canada and Mexico's economy ministry? But maybe that's a solution. And so, yeah, I guess in a very indirect way, it's supply chains are critically important. I think, Canadian businesses are facing a lot of the same risks. Interestingly enough, during the pandemic, actually supply chains functioned quite well. I mean, even though our borders were closed for people, we saw goods move quite freely between at least Canada and the U.S. And it's now that we're starting to experience these issues. And in the longer term, we need a North American solution, I think, to really address these and not just be a Canada-U.S. and Canada-Mexico or U.S.-Mexico. So if we really want to use this agreement as the foundation.
Yeah, and I appreciate that in the sense that, and I think a couple of the panelists have mentioned that we do tend to go from one region to another. We finished USMCA and then we're off on a Trade and Technology Council with Europe. And it's really important in the early days of USMCA to make sure that things are in train to be implemented and the understandings are clear on what expectations are. Looking at this from kind of a little bit of a US-centric viewpoint, is there a particular role that you all see for USTR? What could USTR be doing? I don't see that I've seen them do much in terms of market access or enforcement. On the labor side they have, but I just wondered if there's areas in this sector where USTR could be more active.
I'm not tracking specific things that USTR is working on right now in this sector. A lot of the responsibility for ICT and some of the security issues are actually falling to the Department of Commerce, which, having worked there, I am hopeful that the Biden administration will continue to increase their assets and their capabilities. The jobs that Secretary Raimondo's been handed by NSC and by the rest of the White House are challenging, they're critical, and we've got to get them right. And they're just not at this point, I think, still staffed or structured in a way to do so. The USTR is looking at new potential for new economic relationships in East Asia, and I think those are fantastic. I'm not hearing a lot in this region. Now, that said, I think that other initiatives by the Biden administration, like the Summit of the Democracies coming up, is another area to take a look at a broader set of collaborations. So not just the US-EU TTC, not just USMCA, and not just Quad, but a broader set of like-minded countries who can work together to be able to find common solutions to a lot of these issues. So even though USTR may not be leaning in the forefront of solving these, I think the Biden administration has been thinking very aggressively about how they can really use commonalities across their other allies to chart out a course which leads to greater trust within technology, or at least hopefully will lead to greater trust within technology.
If I may,
Yes.
yeah, a couple of things in the last two questions, and going back to the supply chain. I really think that what you need to have is networks that are interconnected, right? That are integrated, and otherwise things just won't move along. And by networks, I not only mean telecommunications or the networks we've been talking about here, but also transport and energy. In telecommunications, especially U.S.-Mexico networks have been always integrated. In fact, Mexico, and it has been pointed out, has very few IXPs, which is the exchange of traffic, because it is done in the U.S. It is still, much of it is done in the U.S. Traffic flows back and forth, really with there's no real border there. And this needs to keep on being that way. And networks need to be integrated. If they're not, we will see things starting to not work well in the future, and that is at risk, right? And that is at risk because of many different things. One of them has to do with the clean network or whatever the suppliers of the network, right? And how it is implemented in Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. That could bring in huge problems. The other one has to do with data privacy and the way data are moved from one country to the other. Right now, there are pretty much no restrictions there, but they could be imposed in terms not only of privacy, but also in terms of national security, and that could be used by any of the three countries. Another thing is competition neutrality, which is if you start having states investing, are they going to be treated the same way? Yes or no? And then the other one is the use of local infrastructure, which it is very clear in the USMCA that a country cannot enforce data to be kept in one country. That is, that it should not leave the country. But that doesn't mean that it won't be done by creating incentives, right? If governments start using their market, because they're huge players in the market, they will want that as a restriction in the way they hire or contract services. This can also become a big hurdle in integrating the networks in something that works very smoothly right now, because the networks are definitely integrated and there are no issues whatsoever, could by regulation be hampered in the very short term. And that could definitely change the way supply chain networks work. And that is a pity, and we have to be very careful about that.
Great. Part of this digital divide is being able to encourage more access by SMEs to their international export markets like Mexico and Canada. Can the SME dialogue help address some of the existing future supply chain risks? What would be objectives that you all would suggest for the SME group that's looking to offer advantages to smaller businesses? Trevor, I might put you on the spot.
Sure. Well, I don't know if anyone was following today. We have our new cabinet in Canada, but a reminder that our trade minister is also our minister for small business. So, and that continues with the new cabinet. And it's something we support as well. I mean, honestly, Canada has a lot of the companies that my organization represents are large and global companies. We haven't performed quite as well for SMEs, and I think that's a mutual concern across North America. I get a sense that in the U.S. right now, the administration is very focused on promoting SMEs in trade. So, in some ways, one thing, the agreement itself includes an SME chapter and actually an SME committee, which has been quite active. So I hear that some good work has been going on. I don't have any details, but at least there's some discussion around improving the agreement's function. And I'd just say our government is very active in this space, trying to promote tools for SMEs. We're thinking about what we can do as large businesses to also help companies in our supply chain to access international markets. The digital adoption piece is really interesting because, if anything, it can make trade easier for smaller firms, right? Accessing new customers, and we've seen, I think, some really great success stories throughout the pandemic. And unfortunately, well, we never wanted to go through this experience, but if there's any positive, we've had a chance to see this rapid digital adoption. I've heard in some cases in Canada, companies being 10 years in the future where they otherwise would be, because they had to innovate. And so I don't have any specific recommendations, but it's good to see that there is this focus, I think, trilaterally around promoting SMEs and the outcome in the agreement. Make sure that everybody is benefiting from this, and then that our governments are dedicating resources to promote SMEs in trade. And I guess so far so good, but we'll see down the road.
Great. Robert and Ernesto, do you have any comments on that? Okay.
Well said.
Good. Well, I think I'm cognizant of us coming up on the end of the hour, and I want to express my appreciation to our panelists who are very, very thoughtful and had a lot of great ideas. I guess my conclusion here is that we need to think about the digital economy under the North American market and think in clearer terms about what the strategy is and what the future looks like. There's a lot of issues we didn't get to touch on. I wanted to talk about AI, but we can deal with that in the next panel. And I just want to thank everybody for attending today. It was great to speak with you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.